Creativity appears to be one of the oldest and most universal human impulses. It has no biological necessity, no survival value, nor does it belong to our evolutionary pattern. And yet, far into the past and across the globe, we have been singing and dancing and drumming and writing, almost as if creativity is not optional for humans. I think the clearest evidence that we are all inherently creative is that kids do it naturally. Dump paint in front of a child without supervision, and no area of your house will be left unsplattered. And there's a reason rich kids tend to choose art as their vocations. It seems most people, when they are able, will choose a life of creativity. Yet most people will tell you that they're not creative in any way and will cringe with embarrassment at their last creative endeavors. So why do so few of us see ourselves as creative? Partly this can be explained by the war on art that I talked about in my last video, but in this video I want to talk about some of the most common, subtler, more insidious messaging that we internalize from womb to tomb that extinguishes the creative spirit within us, and how we can begin to reject this toxic messaging. I hope this video can in some way awaken the poet, the singer, the artist that has lain dormant within. One of the biggest lies that we've been taught is that our ideas are not worthy of creation because they're not original enough or unique enough. Other people have already done what we want to do and they've done it better than we ever could, so why bother trying? And the truth is, they might be right. We've already had 45,000 years of creativity. What we make probably won't be unique. When Picasso saw the ancient cave paintings at Lascaux, he reportedly said, "We have learned nothing in 12,000 years." But why does it even have to be original? Is originality even desirable? Some of the artists that are considered to be the most groundbreaking, original creatives of all time weren't all that original at all. There's evidence that Shakespeare plagiarized whole paragraphs. The book Harry Potter, A History of Magic suggests that Harry Potter could be a rip-off from worldwide folklore. Many artists now are even actively admitting to directly copying.
I pulled so much stuff from the Gap Band and Cameo and Tony Thompson on every one of those songs. All that. That's wow. It's old disco. That's all it is.
Part of the reason why people copy ideas is because it takes time to find your creative voice. Picasso's early paintings were replicas of figurative accuracy. Stephen King began writing by copying the text from comic books into notebooks. And fashion designer Yohji Yamamoto said, "Start copying what you love. Copy, 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 copy. At the end of the copy, you will find yourself." I actually think it can be really smart to look how someone made something, trace the steps back, and then try to make it ourselves in the same way. If we study how scientists came to their breakthroughs, why not also study artists and replicate their process? No one is good at shitting until someone shows you how to use the potty. Imitation precedes innovation. But perhaps even more importantly, it seems that this remixing of ideas is fundamentally what creativity is. In the book Beg, Borrow, Steal, Artists Against Originality, Robert Shaw makes the case that creativity is always evolving, remixing, and reformulating what has already been done before. And folk singer Pete Seeger said all artists are links in the chain. always responding and building off what has already come before. Every great idea is a reiteration or an innovation of an already existing one.
On the wall of Einstein's office, he used to keep photographs of all his predecessors to remind himself of the great debt that he owed them. In other words, we all stand on the shoulders of giants. There's no Shakespeare without classical Greece. There's no Einstein without Newton. There are no skyscrapers without the skill of generations of builders going back to the dawn of history.
And the folk singer Odetta refused to accuse Bob Dylan for allegedly plagiarizing her work.
Because he stole liberally.
No. We call it folk music. We call it, what do we call it? We don't call it stealing.
Appropriation?
Well, we could, but we don't. It is passing on the folk tradition.
I think a big reason why so many of us are obsessed with the desire for originality is because capitalist colonial hyperfixation on individualism, rivalry, and patenting ideas as our private property runs counter to this concept that we build off of the work of others. Over time, we've become increasingly indoctrinated with the idea that creatives are the sole generators of their work and the need to claim ideas as solely our own, like a dog peeing, marking our territory. I think it can be liberatory to reject the myth of originality and embrace the idea that all creativity is simply responding to that which surrounds us and building off of existing creations. This work does not begin with me and it will not end with me. We are receiving lots of things from our predecessors and we are humble torch carriers, passing that forward to our descendants. It is a reminder of our interdependence. Everything that we are is a product of other people. Nothing is purely our own. It is an invitation to simply start creating without worrying how original we may be. The conventional view of artists is of a lone wolf endowed with innate genius, who single-handedly achieved things no one else had ever before. Elon Musk, Albert Einstein, Shakespeare are seen as gods. We mortals may only enjoy their fruits. As a result, many of us are deterred from ever trying to pursue creativity because we think, I'll never be able to do that, I'm not a creative genius. But any creation is rarely the result of individual genius. Even the most extraordinary person can achieve very little alone. Women have been underpinning the creative genius of the so-called great man of history and never getting credit for it. In the case of Karl Marx, Jenny Marx and his daughters were essential for the creation of what we now call Marxism. And most genius creations did not come from individuals working in isolation or from eureka moments. They came from people working together collaboratively, cooperatively, collectively. Thomas Edison could not have created his invention without the team he employed working in his labs. Einstein made most of his groundbreaking discoveries whilst surrounded by people who he famously used as sounding boards. And even legendary loners like Emily Dickinson and Charlotte Bronte relied on collaborative networks. And as I mentioned earlier, so many creative geniuses relied heavily on the work of those that came before them. Isaac Newton, pretty much the personification of the lone genius, famously said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." Henry Ford famously said, "I invented nothing new. I simply assembled the discoveries of other men behind whom were centuries of work. Progress happens when all the factors that make for it are ready, and then it is inevitable." And Virginia Woolf wrote, For masterpieces are not single and solitary births, they are the outcome of many years of thinking in common, of thinking by the body of the people, so that the experience of the mass is behind the single voice. And people who are considered lone geniuses are not free-floating individuals. They are the product of social and political conditions. Without wealth, nepotism, and other privileges, many would never have been anybody, let alone a genius of history. The scientist Stephen Jay Gould summarized this sentiment perfectly when he said, "I am somehow less interested in the weight and convolutions of Einstein's brain than in the near certainty that people of equal talent have lived and died in cotton fields and sweatshops." It is a useful capitalist lie to keep us believing that the people that make it creatively are simply born with innate talent, rather than drawing our attention to the ways in which social and political conditions make it impossible for some people to be creative. How many more Leonardo da Vinci's medical breakthroughs and innovations to tackle climate change would there be if we weren't forced to spend most of our waking hours in soulless labor? And is it even desirable to be a genius? Do we need more geniuses? Striving for genius, once again, is a useful tool of capitalism because it keeps us atomized, locked in individualism and rivalry, not wanting to collaborate with others because we think that it detracts from our exceptionalism. But communalism, collaboration, exchanging ideas across political and national boundaries is exactly what we need in order to come up with creative solutions to some of the world's most pressing problems. Recognizing that the myth of the lone genius is an illusion and possibly a political weapon can help liberate us to simply start creating without having debilitatingly high expectations for ourselves. It is also an invitation to strive towards creating the social and political conditions in which everyone can bring their creative visions to fruition. From a young age, we are taught to only pursue creativity if we are good at it, if we will succeed at it. If we know that we won't be successful, we give up, because unless there's recognition and reward, we are nobody, we are worthless. But why does art have to be good, have to be successful, have to have an audience for it to be allowed to be made, for it to have value? When did it become about who is the best? Our ancestors 10,000 years ago didn't care if their cave art would be viewed by hundreds of people. Kids don't care if they succeed or not, they just throw themselves at a sandcastle. And what even is success? Success is arbitrary, it's a social construct. Who or what is considered successful is based around elitist ideals. If a rich person made it, it's a masterpiece. If a poor person made it, it's trash. Also, what is considered successful is based around the ideas and tastes of the time period, and history is an unreliable critic. Picasso was considered a failure whilst he was alive. Van Gogh didn't sell a single painting until years after his death, and Emily Dickinson composed 1,800 poems, and only a few were ever published in her lifetime. And more than anything, it really bothers me that under a capitalist system, success is always equated with profit making and quantifiable metrics. How many likes, shares, views you get, how much money you make. Based on these quantifiable metrics, my little YouTube channel is not exactly a success story. I've been making videos for years and have not gotten anywhere in terms of subscribers, views, money. But I feel successful because I love the process of reading, researching, sharing ideas, the community so much. I don't buy into the idea that what I'm doing has any less value if there isn't a tangible, quantifiable impact. A work of creation is still the same piece of work regardless of how many likes or shares or how much money it makes. So why should I view my videos any differently if they get loads of views compared with none at all? If anything, I actually think that I would be less happy and feel less successful if I had a large audience, because it would probably make me incredibly miserable. And this brings me on to another point, which is that striving to be successful, whether in our creations or in life in general, often just makes people utterly miserable. Trying to be successful means that you often have to sell your soul, self-editing what you truly want to express to fit into what the culture expects. Rather than creating out of joy, we ask ourselves, will this sell? Is this what the audience wants? Is this what the market is calling for? Will the algorithm pick this up? And we're thinking about how we're going to package what we're creating before we even think about what's inside the packaging. The constant pressure to churn out more and more work to keep up with the capitalist drive for growth means we end up creating uninspired work that lacks depth, personality, and authenticity. In other words, the need for success destroys the intrinsic value of creation. And even if you endure the painful process of trying to be successful and you end up making it, often being successful is a double-edged sword. As soon as you get recognition, you stop getting joy from the intrinsic motivation of creating, and instead you get joy from the reward. Instead of being proud of your creation, you are proud of the reward. Once you have an audience, often your creativity becomes mutilated or extinguished because, understandably, you're afraid. What if something goes wrong? What if I do something wrong? What will happen to my reputation? Once you succeed, you're put in a box. You made a romance film and now you want to do sci-fi? No, you can't. You have to stay in your lane. You're trapped in a genre, limiting your creativity. You become afraid to step out of your comfort zone. You stop taking risks. You stop experimenting. You stop trying new things. But you can't just keep doing what you're doing. You have the constant pressure to keep working on something bigger, to keep making something better. Jean-Paul Sartre made this point when he refused to accept the Nobel Prize, saying, "I have received enough reward while I was creating my work. A Nobel Prize cannot add anything to it. On the contrary, it pulls me down. It is good for amateurs who are in search of recognition. I am old enough and I have enjoyed enough. I have loved whatever I have done. It was its own reward, and I don't want any other reward, because nothing can be better than that which I have already received." For me, it's been so liberatory. Instead of asking myself, will this sell? Is there an audience for this? Will this be successful? To instead ask myself, does the thought of making this thing illuminate me, ignite me, bring me joy? Focusing on the intrinsic value of everyday practice, on the act of creation in and of itself, process over product.
Never play to the gallery, I think, but you never learn that until much later on, I think. But never work for other people at what you do. Always remember that the reason that you initially started working was that there was something inside yourself that you felt that if you could manifest it in some way, you would understand more about yourself and how you coexist with the rest of society.
Ultimately, we must decolonize our hearts and minds from the capitalist indoctrination that will always be invested in extinguishing our creative spirits. You may never create an original painting, you may never sell a single book, much less become a literary genius. Start singing and your partner may purchase noise-repellent earphones. But who cares? You enjoy creating, you are an artist, that is enough. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me. I've left a bunch of resources in the description box for anyone who wants to start creating but isn't sure where to start. I would really appreciate if you could consider becoming a patron to help me to continue making videos out of joy instead of following success.